You can feel it when the soul begins to dim. It doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle. The light starts fading slowly, the answers drift farther away, and the silence begins to have a sound. A sound that weighs, that echoes inside the chest, as if even God had stopped speaking. And in that moment between the noise of the world and the emptiness of the heart, you realize you've entered the valley. The valley isn't a physical place. It's a state of the soul where the familiar dissolves, and all that's left is to keep walking without knowing where you're going. It's the silent crossing between the faith you had and the faith that needs to be born. And as frightening as it feels, that's where God begins to work in the roots, not in the brightness of answers, but in the darkness that matures. Shadows are strange. They confuse us because they hide what used to be visible. But God never promised only light. He promised presence. And His presence doesn't disappear in the dark. It simply changes form. Sometimes it comes as peace that makes no sense. Other times, as strength you can't explain. The truth is, if you're still standing, it's because grace is still holding you. There's a kind of learning that only grows in the dark. When everything goes quiet, the heart learns to listen in a new way. God speaks through silence and teaches us to trust without proof. His silence isn't absence, it's refinement. It's the time when He whispers things that the noise of daylight would never let you hear. Maybe you're there right now, tired, confused, wondering where your faith has gone. But remember, every root grows in the dark. The absence of movement isn't the absence of life. While you wait, something invisible is forming, and one day what is now shadow will become testimony. Grace doesn't need clarity to work. It blooms underground, among tears, questions, and silence. It holds you steady when all you can do is exist. Beneath the shadows, God doesn't step away. He simply draws closer without making a sound. And when the light returns, because it always does, you'll understand that nothing was wasted. The shadows weren't punishment, they were the canvas where God drew the outline of your faith. The light that comes after the night is never the same. It's softer, truer, more your own. And it's in that contrast that the miracle is revealed. Even beneath the shadows, grace still holds you. There are moments when the soul feels like it's losing its own light. It doesn't happen suddenly. It fades slowly, almost unnoticed. Answers seem to hide, prayers return in silence, and the heart begins to walk through a territory it doesn't understand. It's there, when everything feels suspended, that the valley begins, not with cries or visible pain, but with the sound of silence. It's when even the air feels heavy, and faith must keep walking, even when it can't see the path. The psalmist felt this when he said, "You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend." Psalm 88:18. He wasn't describing mere sadness, but a deep spiritual experience. The moment when the light of understanding goes out and all that remains is dependence on the invisible presence of God. The valley begins when the heart stops leaning on what it understands and starts trusting in what it cannot see. In those moments, God's silence may feel like absence, but it's a different language, the language of faith maturing. When He is silent, it's not because He's gone, but because He's leading us to a place where trust no longer depends on emotion. Silence is the divine way of deepening roots, teaching the heart to remain even when it no longer feels the warmth of light. There's something sacred about this kind of darkness. It doesn't come to punish, but to purify. The dark doesn't destroy faith, it refines it. What was once dependence on signs becomes intimacy. It's as if God were saying, "You may not see me, but I've never stopped being here." And in that kind of silent presence, the soul learns to stand firm, even when everything else seems still. Picture the moment when the last ray of sunlight disappears behind the mountains. The horizon dissolves, and the landscape seems to lose its shape. It's at that exact moment that the heart enters the territory of faith without guarantees, the place where walking becomes an act of trust, not of sight. Mature faith doesn't demand clarity. It blossoms in uncertainty. The valley is the workshop of the unseen. Everything that feels empty is being shaped by hands that work in the dark. Tears are seeds that water the soil of grace. Pauses are rehearsals of trust. Long nights aren't punishment but process. What God does in silence, He reveals only in due time, and when the light returns, nothing returns the same. If you feel you've entered that valley, breathe. The darkness may feel like abandonment, but it's fertile ground. The absence of movement isn't the absence of God, it's the space where He's laying the foundations for what's yet to come. Faith begins where sight ends, and it's at that point that the journey through the shadow becomes the beginning of transformation. And it's right there in the confusing shadows that we start discovering traces of light. Shadows are not the opposite of light. They're the proof that light still exists. Where there is shadow, there's a nearby source of brightness. But when we're inside them, it's hard to remember that. The heart tends to equate darkness with absence, when in truth it reveals a new angle of divine presence. Shadows aren't punishment, they're contour, the place where God sketches the depth of faith. James wrote, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." James 1:17. It's remarkable. God Himself is described as unchanging, even when everything around becomes shadow. That means that though our perception may shift, the light that comes from Him remains constant. Shadows, then, are the quiet reminder that there's still a sun behind what human eyes cannot pierce. When shadows grow longer, it means the sun is still shining somewhere. The same happens in the spiritual life. If there's shadow within us, it's proof that light still reaches us. The problem is that we stare at the dark and forget to lift our gaze. Faith, however, learns to notice traces of God in details, a gentle breeze, a memory, a verse that arrives at the right moment. Even without answers, there are signs that He's still there. God never promised constant brightness. He promised presence. And His presence is enough light for the next step, even if the entire path is still wrapped in dusk. Shadows, in that sense, aren't enemies. They're the shelter where the soul rests while vision matures. Sometimes darkness is the pause that prevents the heart from getting lost in the hurry of light. It's in the shadows that we learn what truly matters. Faith stops being impulse and becomes perception. Small things gain value, simple words carry weight, and silence no longer frightens. God uses shadows to teach the soul to see as He sees. Not with the eyes, but with the heart. The outline of the mountains exists only because there's light behind them. Maybe you're in that time now, between the memory of the sun and the chill of the shadows. But if you look closely, you'll see that darkness also has beauty. It's where contrast is born, revealing depth. It's where the love of God shows itself patient, sustaining without demanding visibility. The shadow is simply the gentle side of light, where grace rests until the new dawn arrives. And in that quiet resting place, the heart begins to understand the secret. Light never leaves. It only changes direction. When it feels distant, it's because it's now shining from within. And that revelation prepares the soul for the next step, the moment when grace begins to bloom in the places no one can see. Grace rarely shines on visible stages. It prefers the underground, the places where human strength no longer reaches. It's there, in the silent chambers of the soul, that God begins His deepest work. When everything seems still, when faith runs out of words, grace keeps breathing within, sustaining what no one else can see. It blooms in the invisible, like seeds that germinate beneath the soil, far from applause and light. The Apostle Paul heard Christ Himself say, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. Those words weren't spoken to someone strong, but to someone exhausted. Paul carried a thorn that hurt him every day, yet he was told that sufficiency wouldn't come from the removal of pain, but from the presence that dwells within it. God's power isn't revealed by the absence of weakness, but by his ability to remain inside it. Grace doesn't avoid valleys. It walks through them. When the soul descends into the cellars of pain, grace is already there, preparing the way back. It works at the edges of consciousness, in the thoughts ready to give up, in the prayers interrupted by fatigue. While man tries to understand, grace simply acts, silent, faithful, constant. It is God's love in its purest form, unseen yet indispensable. There is a kind of strength that only grows from surrender, strength that comes not from resisting, but from resting. Grace doesn't ask you to fight until the end. It invites you to stop and let God be enough. Sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't to keep walking, but to remain standing when the ground feels like it's giving way. Weakness isn't failure. It's the soil where the power of God blooms in silence. Picture the roots of a tree growing in the darkness. They make no sound, they're never seen, and yet they sustain all the life that will one day rise above the surface. That's how grace works. It labors in the depths where eyes can't reach, building stability in the unseen. What looks like delay is actually structure being formed, not to impress, but to sustain. God isn't only in visible victories, he's in the quiet waiting. He doesn't dwell only in the light of celebrations, but also in the dim corners of uncertainty. That's where his voice becomes clearest, because nothing competes with it there. Grace operates with divine precision. It wastes no pain and leaves no suffering without purpose. Everything, even what is hidden, serves redemption. Maybe today you feel forgotten, invisible, beyond the reach of promise, but it's exactly there that grace is closest. It moves where no one is looking, healing, adjusting, holding. The invisible is God's natural habitat. What the world calls darkness, heaven calls a workshop. And in that silent workshop, the heart begins to see that nothing, absolutely nothing, lies beyond his reach. And from that secret place, we begin to understand. Not all darkness is punishment. Sometimes it's protection. We often mistake the dark for abandonment. We think that if God were truly with us, the light would stay on. But the truth is, darkness isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's protection. Some things can only survive away from the spotlight, and the soul is one of them. In his wisdom, God hides what he's forming, not out of cruelty, but out of care. He guards the unseen until it's ready to be born. The Lord declared through the prophet, "I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by name." Isaiah 45:3. Hidden treasures, concealed riches, words that reveal the heart of a God who works in secret. The dark, in that sense, is the vault of providence. It's where he stores what we're not yet ready to carry in the light, because maturity is still being built. Darkness doesn't mean a lack of purpose. It means something is being refined. Just as gold is formed deep within the earth, the most profound virtues are shaped in the unseen places. What feels like silence may be the sound of God protecting you from something you're not ready to face. Grace, many times, is the veil that shields the heart before its time. Think of Joseph. Before the throne came the prison. Before honor came obscurity. To human eyes, God's silence looked unfair. But at the right time, even Pharaoh saw what God had been shaping in the dark all along, faithfulness refined by pain. Joseph wasn't forgotten in the dungeon. He was being prepared in secret. What looked like shadow was actually training for the light. The same happens with us. Sometimes we pray for escape when God is building endurance. We ask for answers, but he offers roots. We seek visibility, but he teaches depth. The dark is where he separates us from the noise of expectations so we can hear his voice again. It's not punishment, it's mercy dressed as silence. God never loses control, even when everything seems out of order. His delay isn't neglect, it's precision. He sees the whole picture while we see fragments. The one who governs the stars also governs the shadows. And if he has placed you in a season of invisibility, it's because something needs to grow in peace before it's revealed. Darkness isn't the end, it's the interval between promise and fulfillment. So if the path seems closed, do not fear. Treasures are being shaped where eyes cannot reach, and when the time is right, God himself will lift the curtain of the unseen and show that nothing was wasted. The shadows aren't the opposite of blessing. They're its womb. It's there that promises mature. And if this reflection has met your heart, keep walking with us. If this reflection is meeting you where you are welcome to stay with us. Subscribe, and let these quiet words find you again. No servant of God ever walked through life without knowing the dark. The night of the soul is not a sign of weakness. It's part of the journey for those who seek truth. Elijah felt it when, exhausted, he sat beneath a broom tree and asked to die. He had faced great battles, yet inside the flame seemed gone. And there, at his lowest point, God didn't rebuke him, he fed him. The divine presence didn't come with thunder, but with bread and rest. It is written, "He went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. Then he prayed that he might die, and said, 'It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life.' Then as he lay and slept under the broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, 'Arise and eat.'" 1 Kings 19:4-5. Elijah didn't receive a sermon, he received sustenance. Heaven didn't remove the desert, it walked through it with him. The same happened with David, who wrote Psalms from the valley of tears. Or with Job, who sat among ashes without understanding, yet still said, "I know that my Redeemer lives." Even Jesus knew the darkness when he prayed in Gethsemane, and heaven went silent. In all of them, the pattern was the same. God didn't remove the night, he sustained them in it. That's grace in motion. There's something that unites all who have walked through the night. None of them came out the same. The valley didn't destroy them, it purified them. Pain became language, silence became school. Faith, once fragile, became mature. God's presence didn't appear in spectacle, but in daily sustenance, in the gentle voice, the quiet touch, the unexplainable strength. These stories remind us that faith is not an escape from pain, but a way to walk through it with purpose. God never promised that we would avoid the shadows. He promised we would never walk through them alone. Every step taken in darkness is a silent testimony of trust, proof that hope still lives even when the eyes cannot see. If even the giants of faith needed the night, why would we try to avoid it? The darkness that frightens us is the same setting where God revealed himself to them. And just as the angel touched Elijah, grace also touches us, not to erase the valley, but to remind us that there's bread and water in the middle of it. The desert is never the end. It's the place where heaven feeds the weary. Maybe today you feel like Elijah, tired, empty, too weak to pray. But the same God who sustained him still sends his quiet touch. He still prepares bread in the middle of barrenness. He still visits the weary not with rebuke, but with care. Because even in the night, he remains light. And it's that silent presence that leads us forward to the place where faith learns to trust without needing to feel. There are days when the heart goes quiet and faith feels far away. Heaven remains in the same place, but the senses no longer perceive it. It's in these moments that we learn God's presence doesn't depend on emotion, it depends on promise. Mature faith doesn't feed on sensation, but on conviction. And even when the feeling disappears, the truth remains. He has never left us. Scripture says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hebrews 13:5. That phrase, echoed throughout the Bible, is an eternal reminder that God's love doesn't change with the weather of the human heart. His presence isn't as unstable as the tides, it's as steady as the one who promised it. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Even when we don't feel him, we are still being held. Mature faith understands that feeling is not the final proof of presence. Often silence is God's way of teaching the heart to discern what matters most. He removes the noise so that love can be revealed without distraction. When the soul feels alone, it discovers it never truly was. The absence of sensation becomes the stage where divine faithfulness continues its quiet work, unseen but alive. Like a lighthouse in the fog, God remains lit, even when the mist hides the beam. The traveler may not see it, but the light still stands, constant and true. That's how God's presence works. It never disappears, it simply changes form. The fog is temporary, the light is eternal. The real question isn't the absence of light, but how much we still trust it when we can't see. Some live confusing emotion with communion, but a real relationship with God doesn't depend on how much you feel. It depends on how deeply you trust. You can be surrounded by tears and still be closer to God than ever before. Tears don't deny his presence. Sometimes they prove it. Grace manifests itself in joy, yes, but also in the comfort that visits a broken heart. As the soul matures, it learns that God's love is greater than our feelings. He isn't limited by our instability. Even in our fluctuations, he remains. Even in silence, he speaks. Even when the heart doesn't perceive him, the Spirit intercedes. God's love doesn't withdraw. It simply teaches us to recognize it in new forms. So if today everything feels cold and distant, don't draw quick conclusions. The absence of emotion isn't the absence of presence. God is still beside you, sustaining what's unseen. Real faith doesn't need to feel to know. It rests in what God has already promised. And in that quiet rest, the soul begins to see, not with its eyes, but with trust. And when the eyes adjust to the darkness, we begin to realize God is teaching us to see differently. When the eyes stop seeing, the heart begins to learn how to. It's strange how darkness, once frightening, becomes the very place where spiritual vision awakens. What seemed empty starts to have texture, and silence begins to carry meaning. God doesn't remove light to punish us, but to teach us to see differently. He trains the soul to perceive the invisible, the subtle, the eternal. The psalmist understood this when he wrote, "If I say, 'Surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night,' even the darkness is not dark to you. The night shines as the day, for darkness and light are alike to you." Psalm 139:11-12. To human eyes the night hides, to God's eyes it reveals. The darkness that confuses us is the same place where he sees with perfection. What to us is a limit, to him is fertile ground for revelation. Faith is like the pupil. It widens in the dark to capture the smallest trace of light. At first, everything seems vague, but with time, vision adjusts. And then, even in the half-light, we begin to see enough to take the next step. God teaches us to walk by the perception of the heart, not by the clarity of the mind. To see, in this sense, is not to understand everything, but to recognize that he is still there. There are revelations that only come when the noise stops. While everything shines, we get distracted by details. It's when the light goes out that we notice what truly matters. The dark is a lens that removes the unnecessary. It filters the gaze, sharpens the focus, reveals the essential. And the essential is almost always dependence. Only those who have lost control discover how deeply they need the constant presence of God. God doesn't want us only to see the light. He wants us to see through it. He desires to form in us a spiritual vision that perceives his movement even in the pauses. Light reveals what is visible, darkness reveals what is eternal. When physical eyes close, the heart begins to decipher what was once mystery, and suddenly the dark stops being an enemy and becomes a silent teacher. To see in the dark is to learn to rest in the unseen. It's to stop demanding explanations and start recognizing presence. It's when the soul understands that faith doesn't need guarantees to go on. With each step taken in the shadow, trust grows. And when fear tries to speak louder, remember this: God never loses sight of what we can't yet see. So if the path feels dim, don't be afraid. Your vision is being trained. The night didn't come to confuse you, it came to teach you. What seems distant now will soon become understanding. And when the eyes of the heart adjust to the darkness, you'll see what was always there, the hand guiding you in silence. And that hand, firm and unseen, leads us to the next revelation, the grip of grace that never lets go. There are moments when everything seems to slip through your hands, plans, people, control. And when nothing feels steady anymore, it's grace that holds. It doesn't rely on your strength, your constant faith, or your unshakable courage. Grace holds even when you let go. It tightens when fear tries to pull away and steadies you when despair starts to sink in. It's the silent reminder that God's love is stronger than any uncertainty. Jesus said, "I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." John 10:28. That's the promise that turns fear into rest. Our safety doesn't depend on how tightly we hold on to God, but on how tightly He holds us. His hand doesn't tremble, doesn't tire, doesn't slip. Even when our hearts wander, His Spirit remains firm, sustaining what the mind can't comprehend. The grip of grace isn't a prison, it's protection. When God holds, it's not to restrain, but to preserve. It's the invisible embrace that keeps the soul from getting lost in chaos. And though pain may press hard, His touch goes deeper than any wound. He surrounds, He covers, and within the pressure, peace is born. Grace doesn't loosen when fear rises. It grows stronger, like roots anchoring a tree in the wind. There's something deeply human about trying to control everything, but something divine about letting yourself be held. The love of God doesn't demand resistance, it invites surrender. When we finally stop fighting what we can't change, we begin to feel the weight of the hand that sustains us. It's in that stillness the soul understands. It's not effort that sustains us, it's rest. Picture two hands intertwined in the half-light, one trembling, the other firm. That's the image of grace. No matter how much ours moves, His remains. With every fall, the grip doesn't weaken, it only changes shape. Sometimes it's a touch, sometimes an embrace, sometimes silence, but never absence. God's love is the only one that never lets go, even when we stop feeling it. Grace is the presence that stays. When everything else fades, it remains, quiet, faithful, unshaken. And that permanence redefines security, not the absence of fear, but the certainty that someone greater than fear still holds you. Even in the valley, even in the shadow, even in the silence, there's still a steady hand holding yours. So if today you feel like you're losing control, close your eyes and simply trust. You're not falling, you're being held. And the darker the path, the tighter the hand that guides you. Grace doesn't let go, doesn't fail, doesn't forget. It holds you to the very end. And when the night passes, it's still there, unchanged. And if these words are reaching you, pause for a moment and breathe. If this speaks to your soul, walk with us, one quiet video at a time. Dawn always comes, but never the same way. After the valley, light is no longer just brightness. It's understanding. It doesn't come to erase the dark, but to reveal what the dark built. The soul that has crossed the night no longer seeks brilliance, it seeks meaning. It has learned there is beauty in waiting, purpose in delay, and presence even in silence. The light that rises after the valley is softer, but infinitely truer. The prophet declared, "Though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light." Micah 7:8. These words weren't spoken by someone who never stumbled, but by one who learned to rise through grace. Micah understood that darkness is not the end of the story. It's the backdrop where God reveals his faithfulness. The fall is not the final point. It's where love begins again. When dawn comes, it doesn't erase the memory of the night, it redeems it. Tears become testimony, wounds become wisdom, and silence becomes gratitude. What once felt like loss now becomes foundation. The light that returns after darkness is different. It doesn't blind, it illuminates. It doesn't dominate, it reveals. It doesn't promise the absence of pain, but the presence of God within it. The heart that has walked through the valley returns more sensitive. It no longer sees darkness as an enemy because the dark became its teacher. It learned that God works both in absence and abundance, that the shadowed season was, in truth, when he was rewriting the story from within. Faith doesn't end in pain. It matures in it. Every tear was the price of a new vision. Spiritual dawn is quiet. It doesn't arrive with explosions of light, but with a breeze that touches the face and whispers, "You made it." In that moment, the heart realizes that God was never far. He was just working differently. The same God who once seemed silent now reveals himself in details, in laughter returning, in hope rekindled, in strength that comes without explanation. And then everything makes sense. The darkness was the stage of transformation, the shadows, the mold of faith, the pain, the field where grace learned to bloom. The soul that returns from the valley is not the same. It's freer, fuller, closer to heaven. What the enemy meant to extinguish, God used to ignite. Dawn isn't just the end of night. It's the beginning of a new story. So if the light is returning slowly, don't rush it. Let it enter gently, as one who respects the process. Each new ray carries the memory of what has been overcome, and when the brightness finally fills the valley, you'll understand. Darkness never had the power to win, only to reveal. And with that understanding, the soul prepares for the final gesture, the act of trust that ends the journey. There comes a moment when the soul understands. The end of the valley is not control, it's surrender. After so much trying to understand, resist, and hold on to what fades, the heart discovers that true rest isn't in solving, but in letting go. The journey doesn't end when everything becomes clear. It ends when we trust. It's the moment when hands, tired of holding the invisible, finally open. The word says, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." 1 Peter 5:7. This is one of the simplest and deepest commands of faith. Cast, not keep, not weigh, not analyze, just cast. It's an act of trust that breaks logic and enters the sacred realm of surrender. God's care isn't abstract, it's active, constant, invisible. He doesn't watch from a distance, he sustains up close. Letting go is harder than fighting because surrender requires faith in the unseen. Yet it's also the place where grace finds room to move without resistance. When we release what weighs us down, we make space for what is eternal. God doesn't ask for strength, he asks for trust. He knows the weight of what we carry, and that's why he invites, "Leave it here, I'll hold it." It's in that quiet exchange that the heart finds relief. Close your hands for a moment. Feel the weight of what you carry. Fear, anxiety, control, exhaustion. Now open them slowly. Feel the simple act of release. This is the micro-action of surrender, an act the world will never see but heaven recognizes. Because in God's kingdom, what is small in gesture is great in faith. The darkness doesn't end when we understand. It ends when we trust. The same God who sustained you in the valley now receives what still burdens you. He wastes no pain, despises no tear. Everything placed in the hands of grace becomes light. He turns what was once a weight into testimony and what was despair into rest. The act of opening your hands is more than symbolic. It's spiritual. It's the precise point where human will aligns with divine love. And when the heart surrenders, peace comes like a breeze, not as an answer, but as presence. Light doesn't erase the shadows. It only shows they never had power at all, and the same silence that once frightened now becomes a place of rest. God still speaks, but now in another language, the language of trust. So before you go, just breathe. Feel the weight leaving. You no longer need to understand, only to rest. The journey has ended, but the presence remains. And if these words have brought peace to your heart, carry them with you, as one who keeps a quiet flame burning within. If you'd like more gentle, hope-filled reflections, subscribe. It helps this small channel reach those who need it. In the end, everything that once seemed dark reveals itself as part of a greater purpose. The shadows that once frightened now stand as witnesses of God's faithfulness. The pain, the silence, the waiting, none of it was in vain. They were simply the paths where grace learned to manifest in new ways. The valley was never the tomb of faith, but the soil where it grew roots. The heart that has walked through the night carries something the day could never teach, the certainty that God remains present even when he is not felt. The light that returns after darkness is gentler, deeper, and more like Christ himself, quiet yet constant. The dark didn't distance you from him, it only revealed how close he's been all along. Maybe you still can't see the dawn clearly, maybe there are still shadows nearby, but now you know they don't mean absence, they mean company. Because grace doesn't leave when the light fades, it simply changes tone, adapting to the silence of the soul. The presence of God isn't measured by brightness, but by constancy, and that constancy never fails. Ask yourself, how many times did you think it was the end, and yet God sustained you? How many times did the darkness seem final, until light somehow returned? Those memories are traces of his faithfulness, reminders that even beneath the shadows, there is always an unseen hand guiding you. Faith, after all, isn't about living without nights. It's about walking through them, with your eyes fixed on the one who never changes. The cross remains the eternal reminder that darkness never wins. The resurrection is the final answer to every shadow. Even when all seems lost, the love of Christ remains, soft and steady, like a flame no storm can extinguish. And if this reflection brought you peace, keep that flame burning within you, and share this moment with someone who needs to remember it too. Let's keep walking together. Subscribe, and I'll meet you in the next quiet moment.